Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-Star Match Game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate, Rewind and Rewatch for October 1st, 2024. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network feed or on our own dedicated Open the Voice Gate feed on all podcast platforms and applications. You can follow us on Twitter at Open Voice Gate. If you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing site. Click the red boxes that sponsor this podcast, and you can set up a one-time or reoccurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, joined alongside, as always, with my co-host, Case Lowe. And Case, we were just kind of commiserating on off-air in our little pre-meeting that we're going to have a little bit of a different kind of format. We're doing Rewind and Rewatch. We're going to talk about Kobe, but first, if you don't mind, Case, I want to take a couple minutes to talk about something that kind of happened this week that hits at least close to home for me, and I feel like we sometimes veer away from Dragon Gate a little bit, but I was wondering if you could just give me a little bit of time up top to talk about that.
Oh, please, you have something real to say. It's you have the floor.
Yeah, and we were talking about this beforehand. For those who are maybe outside of the Americas, might not be aware, Hurricane Helene came through the southeast on Friday, and it went up the coast. And you would think it would be a kind of a normal storm, at least if you hear about American hurricanes. You think, okay, Florida in the southeast, that's what usually happens. But this one was a historic one. It went all the way up into North Carolina and Tennessee, up in the southern Appalachian mountains, the Blue Ridge, and over an area of about 600 miles, and it's a area that's very close to me. I have family who are in Asheville. Fortunately, they are okay, but part of this being so historic is just how different of a storm this is for this kind of area of the country. I lived in the Carolinas for essentially outside of the time of me moving back to Texas. Case, most of my adulthood I've spent in the Carolinas, and it's tough, and it's going to be a long time before anything gets to any sort of normalcy up there, and especially in the mountains, because this is an area that is kind of so isolated that I think news coverage really hasn't gotten in there because they just have not been able to get into Asheville. Case, it's just one of those just unique areas of the country that they never thought that we never talked about having hurricanes that they come visit me. Whenever one would come up through the Carolinas, I would always point out, I'm up in the mountains. I'm 3 or 4 hours away. It's going to have to come over a lot of land to do so. And this was a storm that was able to maintain moisture and do that, Case. It was one of the most terrifying and horrific things that I've at least seen in this area throughout my life. And it really kind of takes you back to Andrew and Katrina in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean the footage I've seen has been alarming, and I asked you before we started recording if there was a reason that it didn't seem like it was getting buzz is maybe the wrong word, but the coverage that it probably deserved. And you explained the isolation to me, and that unfortunately makes sense because this is pretty devastating, and my thoughts go out to your family and anybody that was affected by it, because it is a pretty terrifying storm. The more you watch of it and the more you read of it, and I just hope that aid is able to get to the people that still need it in somewhat of a timely fashion.
Yeah, and it's when we talk about these mountains, a lot of the footage you'll see of highways on the mountains or bridges, you have to go back to the FDR administration when a lot of those were built, and that was at a time where like we were really working on infrastructure, but you don't plan for a 70 trillion gallons of water to come through. Like that was the stat that I saw today that completely took me aback. But I was just hoping that we would just take a couple minutes, just because as we're talking about this, it's not necessarily something that in 2024 necessarily highlights the news cycle. We're kind of way beyond that if we want to talk about media and all of that. But there is a good resource that I have found that I wanted to let people know about. I'll tweet about it. I've been a little radio silent for the last few days. I feel like that's probably a little understandable. Thanks to everyone who has reached out about this. But if you go to appvoices.org, that's appvoices.org/Helene Relief. And there's a dash between Helene and Relief. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. And this thing has every single resource you could think of. I mean, when we talk about isolation, one of the big things about getting resources has been airlifting and getting people to nearby airports so they would be able to bring in and try to find places that they could drop water and food for this. But there's places that there are relief organizations such as Operation Airdrop, the Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. And if you're someone who is all right with that, there's also Salvation Army, Samaritan's Purse. But if you go to appvoices.org/Helene Relief, that's at least for from what I've seen and with talking to people, because that's the other wild thing about this case. Like cell phones have been completely out in this part of the country for 4 days because all the towers no longer exist. They had to fly in temporary towers.
That's all insane. You know, I shot you the message. I saw an entire tree line get taken down, and I've never seen that before. It was like 20 trees all in a row that all timbered over one by one, and I've never seen destruction quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and it's in such a gorgeous and like character-filled part of the country, especially Asheville, Western North Carolina, Boone, like that there are people who are trying to bring in supplies to Western North Carolina by mule. Like, that's what we're talking about. Like, this is how isolated it's getting out there.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you taking the time at the start of the pod to let people know, because it's all insane. And you know, again, I was telling you, I feel like I saw a little like more people than I have been talking about it today. And again, you know, just the point of this discussion is to hopefully fuel people to donate and get aid to those who need it. So it's terrifying. And again, my thoughts go to your family who's there and everybody else who has people there or knows people there. I've got friends from college that grew up in a area nearby, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. So appvoices.org. We'll have a link in the show notes for that. But let's talk about some much more positive stuff. We wanted to get the kind of bummer out of the way up top case. It's been a really kind of interesting week in Dragon Gate. We're going to talk about the Kobe Sambo Hall show, and then we are going to revisit, rewind, and rewatch, talking about a Darkness Dragon and the Dragon Kid feud from the early 2000s. And really the big story out of nowhere case coming out of Kobe Sambo Hall, the show from the 29th, was the return and then the announcement that Komamawa Ichikawa, perhaps one of the greatest comedy wrestlers of all time, will be retiring this year. His final appearance will be in December in Tokyo. It's been noted that he has not really been around a lot. His first real appearance was in the lead up to Kobe Pro Wrestling Festival. He has a match coming up on Korakuen this week. It will be the last time ever. And his opponent has talked about this kind of match, the Mochi Ichi match, will be happening one last time in Tokyo coming up this week. So Stalker Ichikawa, Komamawa Ichikawa, will be retiring by the end of 2024 in case. This is one that I feel like we had, the thought was in our mind, but my gosh, Stalker being gone, that is one of those like main characters that we've seen kind of after the news came out, like just everyone kind of just congealing around him, that about this guy who's been the intrinsic fabric of the promotion now slowly disappearing, and then finally we'll be taking one last go on in December.
In a weird way, in a post-Shima Dragon Gate, he's probably the most recognizable name that this company has to the English-speaking fan base, which is a weird thing I've never really thought about until now. But, you know, do you think more people know who Ichikawa is or know who Yamato is? Do you think more people know who Ichikawa is or know who Shun Skywalker is? I think the answer is Ichikawa. And when you look back at the recent retirements, Yoshino could have happened a few years before it did, and it wouldn't have been as shocking. So not only was the announcement of his retirement not surprising, but then we spent so much time with him because of COVID and the lead up to his retirement that I think a lot of people made peace with it. The Kness thing, I mean, he could have retired 10 years before he actually did, and I don't think it would have surprised any of us. That wasn't shocking news when we heard it. Gamma, we held the door open for him and whisked him away. But this Ichikawa one, I don't know. It kind of made me emotional. It's not quite the depths of the Masato Yoshino retirement where you're saying goodbye to one of the 40 greatest wrestlers of all time. But Ichikawa has been there since day one. He's a second generation student. He has some of the most memorable matches in company history. He has some of, and I think this is the thing that I'm going to try to really hammer home throughout the journey to his retirement. He has some of the most memorable moments in company history between the homecoming match last year with Z-Brats and the German suplex on SB Kento at Final Gate 2020 and our great discovery during one of the early rewinds and rewatches we did this year of him and Taru versus Susumu and Kanda in the hair match. This guy is the greatest comedy wrestler of all time, full stop. But he's also had these serious moments throughout the years that are incredibly memorable and incredibly special. And this one is a bit of a gut punch. I don't think it tears down the fabric of who Dragon Gate is and what they once were. But man, I'm really gonna miss not seeing Ichikawa on these big shows.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, you talked about the other retirements and departures. There were contingencies. There were preparations. I mean, Masato Yoshino bequesting everyone his moves. We see that Jackie Kamei is the only one that really still does one of the moves he was given to him. But you had that kind of handoff, and I would say that going from the original Big Six to the Reiwa Big Six in a lot of ways filled gaps that you would see by your Masato Yoshino retiring, and even like your Darkness Dragon. I mean, we saw Dia Inferno as a character, like we found ways, and UT does the Hikari no Wa more so than any of the other like gifted moves. The Hikari no Wa is just as relevant as is now as it was when Kness was around, but there is no real heir to Stalker Ichikawa, and how can there be? There was only one person who was able to it was Amy, who was the person on Twitter who tweeted out all of these moments and all the people that Stalker had faced, and you can't fill that gap naturally. That's not one of those things that you're able to go like, hey, Masato Yoshino, he has retired, but guess what? We have our new Big Six. We have that. It just you can't replace someone who had those kind of appearances. And you talk about the big show matches. I mean, you would always be able to go, hey, well, we have a Stalker versus X match at a Dangerous Gate or at a Champion Gate. And you're like, all right, I wonder who it's going to be. And that's a part of the promotion that will be going away because there's just no way to replicate that.
He wrestled more. He's probably wrestled more Wrestling Observer newsletter Hall of Famers than the average pro wrestler. I mean, the Takayama match is probably the most famous. I love the Kawada match. I didn't know the story until this week. At least I didn't remember it. That when he wrestled Choshu, they hit Power Hall and everybody thought it was going to be like a cosplay Choshu. And then the place erupted when it was the real Choshu. I don't think I knew that story before. The Tatsumi Fujinami match is fantastic. It's just, he got Muto. He got Muto during the retirement tour. Think about that. Like, outside of forcing Antonio Inoki to come out of retirement, this guy got just about every big name you could ever dream of him wrestling. It is a remarkable thing. It is a marvelous thing. And it's going to be weird not having Kobe World with an Ichikawa match. The Nagata match is one of my favorite matches he ever had. The Kobe World 2007 match. It's an endless string of really high profile, really famous wrestlers that he happened to share the ring with. And I would love to know in Toshiaki Kawada's mind, let's say, what that night was like. But time after time, Ichikawa delivered. How many times? I mean, you can probably count on one hand the amount of times that there was an Ichikawa comedy match that fell flat. It's just not something that happened, whether it was against the Legends or whether it was against the in-house roster. I could always count on, if I'm going to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and watch a Final Gate show, match number 2, it might be, Ichikawa in a broken down Gamma and a broken down Kness and some old guys. And Ichikawa is going to have me audibly laughing out loud because that was just the kind of guy that he was.
And you'd even get like rare moments of like pathos where he decides to put the mask on the line against Naomichi Marufuji. And I'll admit it, I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, Stalker can't lose his mask. And I got a little emotional when that happened. But you have this guy that was just such a relatable kind of presence. I do really want to see, I don't know if this is the kind of thing that Brandon Thurston waits to do Python scripts, but I want to see the person who has had more singles matches against Hall of Famers.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get. I couldn't figure out a way to phrase that. I mean, it's an absurd list, and it's just unbelievable.
And you know what's probably one of the most remarkable things in the real testament to Stalker Ichikawa's career is every time that Stalker went to the United States or went to places and they dropped him in and they would have, Necro Butcher or Brody Lee or something like this, it got over. You did not need a single second of promo. It's not like the Cayman and Ebasan / Kikutaro series where sometimes it's so much built off of Japanese cultural humor in a way. Like there are like Ebasan and Cayman matches that I'll see from Osaka Pro. The crowd will be like losing their shit laughing, and I'm just sitting here going like, I'm the dumb American who doesn't know Japanese cultural norms. Why is this so funny? But you took Stalker Ichikawa and you put him in the middle of LA against Necro Butcher. Everyone gets the act immediately. If you're a wrestling fan and you see this twerpy weird guy in a full bodysuit that has some fuzz on it, his stomach is cut out and he puts paint on it and he has like a weird mask with detachable antenna and ears, you don't have to explain it. Like, people get, oh, this guy is awful, he's going to get the shit kicked out of him, and it works. And I don't know that part of his game gets recognized as much as you rightfully pointed it out. Like, Stalker Ichikawa, for what he was, you had the moments of the Ina Bauer on SB Kento. You had those things that were just incredibly relevant, but you also had the ability that he was never a conditional wrestler. You could have taken Stalker Ichikawa, dropped him in the Sportatorium in '83, and everyone would have been like, what is this dude's deal? Oh, wait, Kerry just threw him into near Earth orbit. Like it was something that he tapped into something that I think was universal.
It's just him failing to do a tilt-a-world head scissors and scraping his head against the ring mat. It's
the sumo always spinning him around extra rotations, doing that too.
It's funny 100% of the time. There's no other way to describe it. It is funny 100% of the time. And, again, like, I love Kikutaro, right? But I have seen some terrible Kikutaro matches that fall flat. And it's so few and far between in the career of Ichikawa to see him do that. So it's weird, right? It's not a Kness and it's not a Yoshino where we can take time and break down what made this wrestler so great. But especially if you haven't seen the Kawada match and the Takayama match, the Aja Kong match, which just got put on the network. They're going to upload a lot of his classic matches here on the network. If you've never seen those, you owe it to yourself to just see a perfect comedy wrestler, somebody that is so incredibly special. And once you get locked into the comedy, if you're somebody that's largely unfamiliar with this catalog, again, my recommendation to you is once you watch a bunch of his comedy matches to go to that Corkin show. And now I got to find the exact date because I forget when exactly it was, but the hair match that he had with Taru against M2K, that is just one of one of the great treats, I think, of the Toryumon catalog.
Yeah, I want to say maybe July of 2000, because it was like post-World or post-Anniversario.
Let's see, because it's like the last time Mochi got hurt, because it was supposed to be a trios match. We covered all of this earlier this year, because it was supposed to be a trios match, and then it turned into just a tag match. Okay, so it was December 21st, 2000. So this is on the network,
right? I was within 6 months.
Oh, my man, well done. So this is December 21st, 2000. This is on the network. We did an entire episode breaking down Crazy Max versus M2K, which this feud was technically a part of, and that was, I think, uploaded in February. So I would recommend going back and listening to that. But this was supposed to be a 6-man tag hair versus mask match that was supposed to be Shima and Stalker and Taru against Masaki Mochizuki, Susumu Mochizuki, and Yasushi Kanda. And this is the last time Masaki Mochizuki got hurt. This is 2020, almost 25 years ago. He got hurt. He had to pull out of the show. And so they just did Stalker and Taru against Mochi and Kanda, Susumu Mochi. And it's the closest Dragon Gate ever came, or Toryumon ever came, to just being straight up Memphis wrestling. It is that level of violent, old school style pro wrestling. And it's done with the top comedy character, fucking Taru, who's terrible in 90% of his matches, and then this mid-card heel tag team, and it's in Toryumon in 2000, and it's perfect. It is a perfect pro wrestling match for what it is.
Yeah, and I'll be interested in seeing what they try to do with him over the next few months. Like, we are getting the last Mochi Ichi match. They have had 80 singles matches. The last one will be coming to us this weekend. Yeah, like there's a part of me that really hopes that we get another Don Fuji Plunder match, because if you go to the same Hakata Starlane show that has Pac versus KZ, right before that you get Don Fuji versus Stalker Ichikawa, and they started bringing out tables and ladders partway through it, and they worked a comedy match around it, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, that's, so I actually, let's kind of dive into this real quick, because the Fuji Plunder match is definitely a way to go. I saw some people in the Discord, I thought this was interesting, I hadn't really thought about this, saying that he should get his revenge on everybody in his final match. Do you have a desire for what you want to see during his retirement match?
I mean, here is how I'm built different. I think his ex-wife needs to make an appearance.
Oh God, I think Shima's more likely.
That's fair. I mean, he still has a move named after her. Like, that's what I want to see. I don't want to see him get his comeuppance. Like, he has like 2 seconds of glory and then it never works out. That's the bit with him. Like, it's the same thing with Iizuka. Like, he ran off into the dark night. Ichikawa should be begging for rematches, and somehow it turns into a 2-hour segment because people like play into it, but they keep on beating the shit out of him. And then eventually you get the 10-minute match, and that's it. Like, look, like, you can have a long bit out of it, but he should not get his comeuppance whatsoever.
I hope they do a giant multi-man match, and I don't love the idea of him getting his comeuppance on everybody. I would love it if he pinned or got really close to pinning Yamato. I think that would be very fun for everybody.
That would be interesting, but I he has to lose, and he has to, like, how many match restarts are you wanting?
Oh, that's a great gimmick. So if it's a 10-man tag, they should restart the match 5 times, because he should be pinned by 4 of the 5 guys on the team.
Right, yeah, and then like the last one ends up being like Don Fuji, and Don Fuji doesn't pin him, you know?
If I was in Dragon Gate, and I was office, I'd be agenting the Konomama Ichikawa retirement match like it's Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker at WrestleMania. It would have that level of care and detail in my mind that we would have to make this the most epic retirement match possible. I think it needs that level of, like, who's the fucking asshole from the Freebirds? I can't think of his name.
PS, yeah.
Yeah, Michael Hayes, thank you. One of my least favorite humans on earth. I need to be the Michael Hayes of the situation. Go, all right, so Naruki Doa, you're gonna want to work the crowd. You're gonna want to really hold Ichikawa here, let Korakuen feel it, and then Ichikawa should do the Undertaker dive where they pull the cameraman in front and he dives on the cameraman. God, my ideas are endless for this match. I hope it's a giant multi-man match, and I hope it's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, but we will. I want us, but before the end of the year, if we're able to make it work, we need to do an Ichikawa episode.
I think we will. So we're doing, Ichikawa and Kobe Sambo Hall, and then some Darkness Dragon Kid stuff next week, or this week rather. We're doing this right now. Next week we are going to tackle the Great Osaka show in what could be some all-time audio, depending on how that show goes. And then
I'm already wrapping myself up for it.
I'm already depressed over watching it. I'm like, it's my anniversary weekend this weekend, so I'm going to be spending a lot of time with my girlfriend, which I'm very excited about. 2 years together, love of my life, yada, yada, yada. And I just know throughout this entire thing in the back of my head, I'm going to be going, I have to watch a 5-hour Glade show. And it's so daunting. Because if you told me, because I'm not going to watch it live, obviously, if I read that it's the show of the year, I'll believe it. And I'll believe it if it's also a worst show of the year candidate. It's just, the thought of it is overwhelming. So we'll have that. We'll have a Corkin review next week. And then 2 weeks from now, I won't say the topic, I won't say the guest, but we are having a first time ever guest on this podcast to talk Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame stuff and some overarching Dragon System topics that I am really excited about. I'm intimidated by this guest. I really want this podcast to go well, but I am really, really excited to record that episode. After that, we can go fully into Ichikawa mode until his retirement.
Yeah, I mean, if you thought Speed Star's final was indulgent case, Stalker Ichikawa, last gong, hold out, feel the best. I'm trying to think of all of the Hiroshi Tanahashi catchphrases they should have penned to his tour. Like, because there was a few things that cracked me up last year more than Kichi Muto final goodbye. Like, I want something like wild for his final match one. You
know what Ichikawa match we missed that feels logistically impossible, and this is a bummer. I just now thought about this. We never got Ichikawa versus Okada.
Yeah, that would have been something.
That feels like that would be the time for Okada to come back to the Dragon System, to come home. It's a shame he's not retiring at World next year.
Yeah,
because I could have talked myself into that actually happening.
Yeah, I'm going to see if we can make some calls and get this to stretch out to World 2025. Like,
right? That feels realistic. We could do that.
Yeah.
We know people.
That's within the realm of possibility. Hey, Kazuchika Okada, I need you to like circle a date in July. Don't worry about it. You might have to like fly back to Arlington to go do y'all in. Don't worry about it. You need to do Stalker Ichikawa's retirement match. Like,
I would so much rather
owe this life bet to the Dragon System, Kazuchika Okada. You need to come back here and do this.
This is an inherent flaw in AEW, which has largely been very good lately, that I would so much rather see Okada wrestle Ichikawa and miss a big AEW show instead of him like have an actually good match in AEW right now.
Yeah, I'm irrationally mad that Okada versus Danielson 3 is happening.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
what are we doing? And I thought, by the way, I think I'm the high man on the Tokyo Dome match. That match to me is
you're higher. That's fair.
It's a top 10, arguably top 5 match of this year, and I don't want to see that under the circumstances.
Yeah, why is he doing a challenge like this when it's a Final Countdown tour where he is retiring after he loses the belt? Why is he putting the belt up against anyone other than the guy who grocery bagged him?
And they should be doing right now. They should be doing multi-man brawl. They should be doing Z-Brats Gold Class right now, basically.
Yeah, let's talk about Z-Brats Gold Class in this Kobe Sambo Hall show. So they were at the Friendly Confines on the 29th. We had a couple things happen on the show, of course, the Stalker Ichikawa retirement announcement. But what we had as our main event, Gold Class versus Z-Brats, we threw roses at them all last week. It's time to do it again. This time in the main event, it was the whole complement of Gold Class, BB Hulk, Benkei, Rita, Mochizuki Jr. versus the selection team of Shun Skywalker, Jason Lee, Kota Minoura, and Johnny Valletta. Rita got the win with the Re-Tanic. Now it is no longer the Minori Tanic. It's now the Re-Tanic on Jason Lee in 13 minutes of 48 seconds after an absolute brawl war. It felt like that one was everything we were thinking that this feud was going to do. Well, they one-upped it once again.
I think this is the second best match in Sambo Hall this year, only behind Jason and Jackie versus Shun and Ishin from Rey de Parejas, which is when Jason turned and joined Z-Brats. I mean, this was an otherworldly brawl where I thought all 8 guys, and I once again have to commend BB Hulk for putting his working boots on, and for 2024 BB Hulk standards, working his ass off in these tags. But this is exactly what I want. This is more escalation. We talked last week about how this was becoming kind of a low-key feud of the year contender, and part of that was that from August through now, every interaction they've had, every match has felt a little bit more heated and a little bit more personal. And it seems like Z-Brats is getting more and more sick of Gold Class, and Gold Class is getting more and more agitated with Z-Brats. And it all funneled into this match. And it felt like it was an escalation of what we talked about last week. And Junior was great, and Rita was great, and Ben was great. And the Z-Brat side, I am almost at a loss for words here. I think heel Minoura is clicking. I think heel Jason is just such a wonderful addition to this unit. Valletta was phenomenal in this match. And believe it or not, Mike, I also thought Shun Skywalker was utterly incredible in this match.
Who would have think Shun Skywalker being great in a wrestling match in 2024 in this economy? Yeah, this was just, I love the way that they used the crowd brawl in this feud, and particularly in this match, that every time that it felt like things were going to get under control and it felt like that Gold Class was about to pull out ahead, guess what? We're going back to the crowd. It was worked really well, which made the finishing stretch where it's not just that he got the Minori Tannic on Jason to get this. It was that Minori Tannic was after a cookie sheet and a full spear. So like they were able to isolate and pile on, and it felt like an absolutely earned match and a real strong result for them going into the Cork, in which we do have the selection for Z-Brats. It was announced after this match: Shun Skywalker, Kota Minoura, Hamare, and Johnny Valletta. Not the 4 we were thinking, Case.
No, it's an interesting situation. So again, it's loser leaves unit, and it's Gold Class against, like you said, Shun, Kota, Valletta, and Hamare. I want to get out in front of it. And I said this when the match was announced, and after seeing the Z-Brat side, I think it's especially worth mentioning. Hulk feels too obvious in this situation, right?
Yeah, he does.
That's just not Dragon Gate, especially after the widely passed around Shun Skywalker banter on Twitter today, in which he himself eliminated BB Hulk from Gold Class. That can't be it. They've got to be doing something more here.
Yeah, and when you have a selection where we were expecting, I think everyone was like, oh, if they're going to start like shaking up Z-Brats and maybe start evolving it into whatever its next incarnation is, Kai is obviously the person that needs to get dealt with. Instead, you have the 2 newest members, Hamare, the rookie, and Johnny Valletta, the person that I would say not that the bold selection, putting Johnny in a match where if he gets DQ'd or something happens, he gets kicked out of Z-Brats.
I think he is the guy that should lose. I really think it goes a little bit to what I talked about last week, where I was worried about Valletta getting overexposed. They should write him out of the territory right now. Valletta served his purpose. He got the Dreamgate match. He's been great in multi-mans, and he got the Rita match. And if you send him packing back to Malta right now, you open the door for forever Gianni Valletta reunions. Whatever the next heel unit is, he can come back and join them. If you do a Dragon Gate nostalgia show 5 years from now for the 30th anniversary, you can bring him back then and sound the siren and have him go through the crowd, and everybody's going to go nuts. If he goes now, you are leaving on a high point. And the trick, like I said last week with Valletta, we should always wonder what if with him. And very rarely should we actually see that if. And I think Ben pinning him or Rita pinning him after a bunch of nonsense, I think that is the way to go. I think that would be the most exciting thing to do.
Yeah, and then in Fury, Shun goes, okay, fuck this. We're going straight to disbands. You know? Because Johnny was like his hidden weapon. And the fact that something happens will allow him to be eliminated. I think also a piece of magic with Johnny and Dragon Gate should be, you should not go all the way. You should always basically, right before you feel like you tell the perfect story, he should be out of the territory.
Completely. And that's something that is largely missing in wrestling. It was always my Keith Lee complaint was Keith Lee's like a guy that you needed for 8 months. He needed to never leave his feet, and then the moment he left his feet, he should be gone, and this is just kind of one of those things that American wrestling companies don't get, and American wrestling fans are too stupid to realize that sometimes a guy just needs to go, and that's okay, and that's not a reflection on the company, and this is a time where Valletta just needs to go. We've seen him do the things that he excels at. We've got the Rita match. We're good. Leave me wanting more. When there's a new heel unit and their colors are, blue and red and white, let me wonder what Gianni Valletta will look like then and hit that siren and have him come back. But I'm good. It's a perfect ending right now if his Dragon Gate career for the time being ends in Korakuen Hall.
And he could come back next month and do a Stalker match.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah,
that's good.
That's the only thing I want to see Johnny do left on this run is get a Stalker match, and we need to have one of those. Like the fact that hasn't happened, because bro, who had the best chemistry with him? Brody Lee. So why not see if Johnny has that?
Very much so, very much so. One of the things that I thought I had two takeaways from this match that were going off in a bit of a different angle. I'll start with the Shun specific one. And I worry now, and I say this with all love because he's a brilliant wrestling analyst, even if I disagree with him most of the time. I saw a few weeks ago Matt D on Twitter was praising Larry Zbyszko's stalling and trying to explain how it was actually good. And it was kind of one of those where I read it and went, cool reasoning, you're wrong. It sucked, but I appreciate the thought process. And I fear this will sound too much like that. But Shun Skywalker has become the most compelling crowd brawler in all of wrestling. My eyes are just totally glued to him because, one, did you see him rear up and act like he was going to punch a fan in this match? There was a fan that actually, he looked like Yuki Yoshioka, but in glasses. And it was like Shun threatens to punch this guy. He boots a young boy in the head as he's scrambling and trying to fix the situation around him. And then he's taking bumps and just falling into people. It's just amazing watching this guy work. And again, this is the most granular possible breakdown of in-ring action you could have. And I understand if this is eye-roll inducing, look, I get it. But I think with certain wrestlers, when you reach a certain level, you can break them down to this degree. And with Shun, I can break him down to this degree. And it's overwhelmingly complimentary that when they hit the floor, whether it's in Osaka or it's in Kobe or it's in Korakuen, he is better at it than almost anybody else.
Yeah, and it is at a level now where maybe it is that I think that Z-Brats finally has maybe found that next win that will take them and be like, all right, now we're ready to see either what second generation Z-Brats is or whatever is happening here. But over the last 24 months, as Shun has discovered this character and really has gotten into it, I just find it fascinating, how much he's able to accomplish by just essentially by presence at this point. Because it's not just him going like a madman, it's him just stomping around the outside, intentionally walking through rows of people's in their seats, knocking their bags out of the way. It's little things with him that I think has really turned Shun into that top 5 in the world wrestler right now.
There was that takeaway from me, and then the other thing that I thought about, and this goes hand in hand with the throwback stuff that we'll talk about here in just a little bit, because I was rewatching a lot of 2001 and 2002 Toryumon, and the time period we're discussing has numerous 3-on-3-on-3 matches, and it got me thinking about current day Dragon Gate and what I really want and what I really want at the November Korakuen, which is I want the 4-way trios tag. I want Z-Brats, I want Gold Class, I want Vibes, and I want D-Courage, and I want their best trios, and I really want them headlining Korakuen Hall with that match sooner rather than later. I think the roster's ready. I think the roster is really deep, and something I had never really thought about up until I started thinking about the idea of that match and how it's been so long since we've gotten one, and I think right now is the time to do it. Dragon Gate is cooking to some degree when you keep on thinking of scenarios of things they could do in Korakuen specifically. This is a Korakuen hot company. They've had great Korakuen Hall shows this year. The roster feels deep, and I started thinking about, well, I want the 4-way trios match, but then I also want this. And then there was talk of Yamato versus Strong Machine J and what that would look like in Osaka versus Korakuen versus Yokohama. And I became overwhelmed with things that I want to see Dragon Gate do in Korakuen specifically. And that might be the true marker of how hot Dragon Gate is from a creative standpoint. Because right now, I want to see them do a million things in Korakuen Hall, none more so than a giant multi-man match.
Yeah, and we're getting a 8-man tag next this week, and who's to say that I don't really want to see Z-Brats versus Gold Class happen at Gate of Destiny, but I can't like just shake my thought out of my mind. It's like, I think that disbands match, like we're getting to that point, and that there's no more Korakuen match to me than a disbands match.
I agree. That to me, that is the building for those. But there's a million things they could do right now. It's really, really exciting. Another quick thought that I've got, I don't want to go overboard with this Gold Class stuff because it's largely new in the grand scheme of things for both of these units' existences. They haven't spent a ton of time together in the way that Z-Brats and Natural Vibes have. Would you say that Vibes is still the hallmark opponent for Z-Brats during their existence? That when you think about Z-Brats, you will think about Natural Vibes matches more so than Gold Class matches, or is Gold Class taking that mantle?
I still think it's Natural Vibes just because you had the various combinations that happen, and then the ways that they did the whole Jackie Funky Kamei storyline over the last year and all of that with Jason leaving the factions. Like, you have a lot more of a deeper fabric there, whereas Gold Class really starting this summer, it came on hot and heavy in that manner. So I feel like there has to be a certain level of longevity for Gold Class to kind of take them at this point.
I agree. I do think it's odd. Unless I'm forgetting something, I would say there probably hasn't been a Vibes Z-Brats match that has the stakes that this upcoming Gold Class match does. I don't remember any match between those two where somebody was forced to leave a unit outside of the cage match from this year.
Right.
And that I think definitely helps just the idea of this Gold Class and Z-Brats feud being so hot, because for quite a while last year, we speculated on, okay, well, Vibes and Z-Brats, they have to be building towards some sort of disbands match, and then it just never happened. And then the Jack story happened, and I like him and Big Hug. I like Big Hug. I have Big Hug thoughts coming out of this show. The way they transitioned him out of Vibes, still, it's not entirely satisfying to me. And I don't think he's gotten the momentum that he had in May back. And I don't think Monte has gotten the momentum that he had at the start of the year back. And I think maybe part of that is just that they're quite honestly missing Z-Brats. They've been off with Gold Class instead. I don't know what it is. But at the very least, if you would have asked me a month ago, it would have been, Natural Vibes, no doubt. But now I at least think Gold Class has to enter the conversation of who is the best Z-Brats opponent.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair statement. And I think that you have a level of emotional stakes that just because you've had the Mino change, and then what happened with Minorita just coming back with Richa and the mini Skywalker little interlude, that even though there was constant back and forth with Natural Vibes and it's been longer, I feel like that the tone has been completely different, and that makes it a bit of a more of a higher potential feud in my mind. Because I never would have said Natural Vibes versus Z-Brats was a feud of the year. Whereas,
no, they were great, but it was a little. It's kind of a little RED masquerade where you go, they've had a bunch of great matches, but they don't have that definitive match. And it feels like we're getting closer and closer to a Z-Brats Gold Class definitive match.
Yep, absolutely. Elsewhere on this Kobe Sambo Hall show, we had the debut of the newest member of the Dragon Gate roster, Akihiro Sahara, face off against fellow super heavyweight Big Boss Shimizu getting the win in 9 minutes and 12 seconds. Not with a crab hold, however, he put Sahara down with the Big Boss press. And it was interesting. I felt like I'll get I want to pitch it to you, but impressions I had of him as a future wrestler versus now are completely different, I feel like, with Akihiro Sahara.
I think this guy's going to be really fun to watch mold. It's an easy comp to say, oh, he's just like Shimizu. but he's just like Shimizu, where I think his young boy period is going to be really interesting because I think he's going to try a lot of things from a simple moves perspective. Some of them are going to stick, some of them are going to not. And I could see this guy just, one day, a year and a half from now, having a belter of a match and everybody going like, oh my God, Sahara's great now. And then we'll just live in this existence. It is not the Homari debut. It is not, a TN Revolution type debut, but most debuts are not. I thought this was an outright overall success, however. I really like this kid, and I really, really want to see him make tape on all of these shows going forward.
Yeah, I guess like the difference was it felt like he was going to be such a physical presence as a future guy. And when you see him like in normal gear, you're like, yeah, no, he is a bigger guy, but he's not that big, I guess. Like, and I'm like, oh, I guess him being a power fighter, yeah, he'll be a power fighter, but it's not necessarily going to be like Yoshiki Kato just towering over people, or even like Shoya Sato, what felt like could have been an actual like heavyweight. Like Sahara's a heavyweight, but it's not necessarily like the one where it's like, oh, at this stage, him versus Kondo is going to be meaty guy slapping meat. They played to that, but it was very much like, I think the Shimizu comp that he did was like, it's obvious, but like they're going to like give him chances to like figure himself out. I would not be surprised if they're like, okay, he's going to kind of get like a lovable goof character, or he's going to be doing comedy as they're trying to kind of let him kind of grow into it and figure himself out as like a wrestler. Because I mean, like it took so long before Shimizu became like Big Boss Shimizu. I mean, everyone decides to forget that they had him play a comedy wrestler for his first year and a half before they let him have the singlet and the mohawk.
And if you look at 2013 Shimizu, he's half the size of 2024 Shimizu. I will reserve my thoughts on the possibility of Sahara being a power fighter until I see him with somebody else, because there's a chance here that they Kevin Nash Mike Awesomed him. Where
entirely fair. That's a good point.
He wrestled the guy that has the same body but is 10 years older, thus much bigger. I would like to see Sahara even in the ring with like a Susumu type, let alone Tanaka or Estrella or Daya. I think when he does that, we're going to go, oh no, this guy, especially for Dragon Gate standards, is humongous.
Right. Yeah, no. Sahara versus Tanaka is something I could get into.
I would like to watch Tanaka versus a dustpan right now. There's no bad combination with Tanaka, let me tell you.
Speaking of Tanaka, semi-main event, D-Courage versus Natural Vibes. Tanaka got the win over the Open the Triangle Gate champion, UT, with the survive, that tilt-a-whirl like roll-up that I hate. It's his finish. But he looked awesome in this, and we did not get a Triangle Gate challenge coming immediately out of that. But I think that the situation's there. I mean, in his home building, making the Triangle Gate, like I'm willing to put that in pencil, not in ink yet, but it does kind of feel like we're going towards D-Courage versus Natural Vibes in Osaka.
I look forward to trading snippy emails with the rest of the SFM 50 panel this year over my placement and thus the overall placement of Ryoya Tanaka. I don't know how high I'm going to go with him yet, but on a show-in, show-out basis, let me tell you, not a lot of wrestlers in the world I enjoy more right now. And his chemistry with Vibes, both with KZ and with UT, is like, holy shit, what am I watching level chemistry. And that is me, who has been watching for a very long time, that sometimes even good Kobe shows like this, I have to try to get myself fired up to watch it because I never know what the atmosphere is going to be like. And I was told, by the way, there were standing room audience members and for this show. So I don't know why the lights were on. It looked hideous, but very, very, I'll say not a very good house, but a good house from people that informed me from in the building. And yeah, I've seen a lot of good chemistry with just random pairings of wrestlers and mid-card wrestlers throughout my time covering Dragon Gate. Tanaka with KZ and Tanaka with UT is a level above just, hey, they work really well together.
Yeah, so I am really hoping they revisit this. Like, now he has a legit claim, and unless like he's handing it off to a returning Yoshioka, like we were talking about last week, it does seem like that's the safe match to make in that building.
Yeah, you would certainly agree that he's one of the 50 best wrestlers in the world this year, right?
50 best wrestlers. Yeah, like I'm thinking about like I am pretty negative on a lot of wrestling right now.
Yes,
But
as am I.
but Ryoya Tanaka is one of the few people that when I see this guy, I'm like, oh yeah, here's Ryoya. He's going to be great, and he never takes a step out of line. He never, considering that. I mean, what he's at 15 months now, 16 months in.
Yeah.
I can't name a single match that fell apart because of him. Like he is well beyond his level of experience. I think he has to be one of the top 50. I don't think he would be a top 20, but 35 to 50 range, I'd feel comfortable putting him in now.
That's kind of the ballpark I've got him in. I could see him getting to 30. I don't envision a better spot than that for him right now. He does have, he and then Kakuta and Daya versus Ishin, Kai, and Shun from Champion Gate this year. I mean, that was a 4.5-star match, and he had another great Z-Brats match, trios match with Ishin, Shun, and Kato in February. He weirdly, now that I look at it, he doesn't have that many notebook matches for me this year, which I kind of like, because it goes to show that D-Courage themselves have not had this amazing year. It is Tanaka specifically that has been incredible. Again, I wouldn't consider Daya, I wouldn't consider Kakuta, but Tanaka is a lock for my top 50 this year.
No, I like that a lot. Just touching on the rest of the Sambo show, just to close it out. Of course, the main event was Gold Class versus Z-Brats, Natural Vibes versus D-Courage, semi-main event. The go-to intermission match was a Royal Toryumon Sambo. That was when we got the Stalker appearance and then announcing his retirement. Match 4, Yamato and Ryu Fuda versus Gurken Mask and Yosuke Santa Maria. It was Gurken Mask over Fuda. There, before that, you had Sahara's debut against Shimizu. Match 2, Kung Fu Masters versus former members of the High End Alliance. Ho Ho Lun took out Problem Dragon in 3 minutes, and the opener was Big Hug and Estrella versus Kai, Ishin, and Hamare. Ishin got the win with the Jinchu on Estrella. A fun Kobe Sambo Hall show with a lot. I feel like that whenever we talk about Kobe Sambo Hall shows, we don't really have 4 points to get to. Usually it's 1 or 2, then we go through the match results. This was a deep show, especially from like a storytelling standpoint.
Oh my God, yeah. Company's very good right now. It's kind of as simple as it is. I will say, I know he's happy traveling the globe. I would love it if Estrella was in Big Hug. Estrella is a perfectly fine undercard wrestler who I think is really interesting to watch. When he's good, he's very good. I don't think he has those bad Estrella nights anymore. Now, at worst, he's just fine. He's forgettable, if anything. I would like him in Big Hug. I would like him to stick around, quite honestly.
He is, I have in my notes, he is now your replacement level Dragon Gate wrestler.
100%. He's better than an overwhelming majority of the U.S. indie scene. If he wants to go back there and work, rest in peace, Black Label Pro. You will not be missed. But in Japan, he's just a nice wrestler to have on these shows, and I think it would do him a lot of good to come home and work this Dragon Gate roster and get better in the same way that everybody else does.
And he wouldn't even have to be a every show, every loop guy. Like wherever, I know he's a Kobe native. Like if they're like Kansai indies and like stuff like that he wants to fill out his schedule with, I feel like that would be totally fine. Like I called him the war. Originally, I had my notes net neutral Estrella, but that's not fair to Toru Owashi, who is a net positive. Like he is a replacement level wrestler, and I feel like especially when you have like young roster members like Hamare that you're trying to obviously elevate near immediately, and even people like Ryoya Tanaka, it's good to have some people like that at the bottom end. So yeah, I don't think I would have said this 2 years ago about Estrella, but I'd be down for him sticking around.
I'm with you. I like him quite a bit.
So that was Dragon Gate this week in 2024. As we mentioned earlier, we will be reviewing the Cork and Hall show coming up next week. But Case, it's time for us to get into Rewind and Rewatch, and this one is a special one. At least for me, it's my favorite feud of the Toryumon era. We're going to be talking about Darkness Dragon versus Darkness Dragon versus Dragon Kid.
This is your ballpark. This is we're recording this on October 1st, so we obviously did Dragon Gate in LA at the beginning of September. We've got another classic show coming up in 2 weeks in October. So you're really getting 3 Rewind and Rewatches in the course of 2 months here. And this is one that you specifically wanted to do. It's a fun one for me because it's wrestling that I really enjoy, but not on the level that you do. And so it's always fun for me to go back and rewatch some of this footage. And, you know, some of it I'm crazy into and some of it is good, but it's just like, all right, well, you know, when I go back and watch 2001 Toryumon, you know, I'm not necessarily going back to watch this per se. It is an odd thing here with Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid. Like, we covered, again, in February, we covered the rise of M2K leading to Mochi Contra Mochi in February of 2002. And so we basically covered 2 years of the promotion through the lens of M2K. And there were a ton of promos that we translated, or at least used the translations of. And there were a ton of angles that we had to break down. And yes, there were matches that, you know, we labeled must watch. It is not the case with Dragon Kid and Darkness Dragon. It is a really, really simple feud. It is, in essence, a bunch of matches. And as we go through this timeline, because we still do have a timeline and we'll sprinkle in some anecdotes here and there, in the episode description and in the Open the Voice Gate channel on the Voices of Wrestling Discord, I have compiled a list of 6 matches that you can watch, including the match, Darkness Dragon versus Dragon Kid at Absolutemente 2002. That can, you can say you've watched this feud from start to finish if you watch those 6 matches. It is not this deep engrossing story. I kept on thinking I was missing something as I was doing my notes, but it's pretty simple. Dragon Kid existed. Darkness Dragon came in as the evil Dragon Kid and said there's only room for one dragon in Toryumon, and they wrestled a million times for a year and a half until the mask match.
Yeah, and I kind of have a thesis with this feud that Dragon Gate has kind of used for the 23 years since, and we you can see a lot of this, especially if you're a newer fan. The Die-In Inferno feud was cribbing almost note to note like this, and actually kind of weirdly ended up being as long and drawn out because of various reasons. But you have this one that, like, you set something up in the summer of 2000 and you let it simmer. You find a use for someone on your roster that wasn't necessarily working in a previous role. Instead, you find you write off that role and you introduce him back, and he becomes, I would say, one of the most like emblematic wrestlers in this promotion's period, because you have at least, if you pull up a match from Toryumon or throughout Dragon System history and you see Kness as Darkness Dragon, you know exactly you're talking about a essentially 30-month period. That and this period that I think it kind of weaves in and out, and you kind of have seen, like, in a lot of ways, this was the first feud that they were kind of pigeonholing, that they were like, all right, just remember that Darkness Dragon's around, and eventually Dragon Kid and Darkness Dragon is going to happen. And I feel like that the company, ever since this feud, has like learned from this time, like, hey, we don't have to set up and blow off a feud over 2 months or 3 months. Like, as much as we love Gold Class and Z-Brats, that's been a feud that has been doing hot things all summer into this fall. Darkness Dragon versus Dragon Kid shows what happens when you just plant the seed, and then you later off you take out your investment and you pay it off in the main event of the biggest show of the Toryumon era.
So we begin our timeline June 4th, 2002. This is the Anniversario show. Now we recognize it as Kobe World 2000. There was a singles match on this show with Taru and Makoto, who had issues essentially since Toryumon first began. They were both in Crazy Max at this time, and they wrestled in between Aja Kong and Stalker Ichikawa and SUWA and Dragon Kid. They wrestled a loser leaves Toryumon match where Taru utterly dominated Makoto. He hit him with 4 different Taru drillers throughout the match and sent Makoto packing. If Makoto is not a name that rings a bell, that is the man we now know as Darkness Dragon and Kness.
Yeah, so Makoto at this time, we didn't really talk too much about Makoto during Crazy Max versus M2K.
Because no one does.
Yeah, because he was one of those many failed fifth members of Crazy Max.
The cursed spot.
The cursed spot. He was a Northeast Japanese wrestling trainee. He came up through Ampro, then ends up in Wrestle Yume Factory. Basically ends up being an indie wrestler for the first 3 years of his career. Does not really find a home until he ends up with Toryumon as at first as Makoto, the urban vampire, but then later on after they write him off and he reappears as Darkness Dragon. And it completely changes the guy's career. He probably would have just been wrestling Wrestle Yume Factory like forever if it wasn't for the fact that they found him and he got put into Crazy Max, and then everything kind of was off to the races.
He comes across in the Makoto era like a modern day Noah junior heavyweight, and that is not a compliment.
Yeah, a whole lot of Makoto versus Dayu Kawauchi stuff happening at this time, which not really where you would want to be if you want to have someone, especially being the fifth member of Crazy Max. Like, you don't want to be facing Dayu Kawauchi. No one really needed to.
August 24th, 2000. This is one of the most infamous shows in Toryumon history because you not only have the M2K versus Crazy Max 6-man that was the start of the double ring out committee where M2K promised to ruin every match by having it end in a double count out. And while it might not be the best M2K versus Crazy Max match, it is undoubtedly my favorite because it is one of the loudest Korakuen crowds I have ever heard. You have that match in the semi-main, and then you have Dragon Kid defeating SUWA in their iconic hair versus mask match in the main event of that show. Immediately after the match, streamers hit the ring, Dragon Kid is crying and he's celebrating, and then a man in a black Dragon Kid costume hits the ring. He beats down Dragon Kid, and despite not identifying himself, this would become the man that we now know as Darkness Dragon. I should note real quick before I throw it back to you, Mike, it was not common knowledge at the time that this was Makoto. This was not something that people were like, oh, well, he just left and now this is going to be him in a mask gimmick. People thought at the time that it was the Canadian wrestler Brett Como, who was the Ultimate Dragon in WAR, the foil to Ultimo.
Yeah, so Ultimo is replaying one of his storylines. It wasn't necessarily the one that kind of took over the world. Like, what one has to remember that it's like, oh yeah, no, a lot of people know who Brett Como is because his nickname was Thunderbird Brett Como, and he was the first person to do a shooting star press from the apron to the floor. Like, the WAR thing being the foil of Ultimo Dragon kind of fit. Like, okay, we've seen a lot of people at this time. Like, let's remind the listeners or people who might come in very soon. Like, if you're looking at the DNA and the intrinsic fabric of what becomes the Dragon system, one of your biggest feeders is WAR. So having the idea that Thunderbird Brett Como was the Ultimate Dragon, who would have ended up being Darkness Dragon, especially at a time that Brett Como still was pretty active in Japan. He ends up having like it kind of weirdly like how Luther was before AEW kind of career in Japan.
Yeah, it would have made sense for him to go after now the protege of Ultimo Dragon, but it was not him. It was, again, Makoto, and then in the future, the man that we now know as Kness. So that is August 24th, 2000. We now go to November 27th, 2000. And after months of wrestling Dragon Kid in mid-card matches, M2K was desperate to fill the ranks, and they, with Masaki Mochizuki and Chocoball Kobe out, recruited Darkness Dragon. This happened the first time they went to Kagoshima, which was a big deal at the time. This was, the first time they went to that market. SUWA was from that area. SUWA was on the radio promoting this show months in advance, and so they go to Kagoshima, and in a tag match with the aforementioned Dayu Kawauchi, Darkness Dragon turns on him. He joins M2K. And so we get the original version of full-on M2K with not only Darkness Dragon and Chocoball Kobe, but of course Mochi, and Kanda. So that is on November 27th. The next day, there's a show opening promo with M2K minus Darkness Dragon. He does not appear in the show opening promo. Chocoball Kobe, for whatever reason, had his cell phone number and called him on his cell phone in the opening promo and referred to him in that promo as Kness, which is short for Darkness, if you're ever wondering how he got that name. And then a month later, this is the aforementioned, actually, from the start of the show, the Korakuen Hall show with the Stalker Ichikawa hair match, December 21st, 2000. M2K is back in Korakuen Hall. Masaki Mochizuki introduces the full power M2K in the opening promo. Everybody introduces themselves, and this is not only the show in which Chocoball Kobe becomes Chocoflake Keiichi, but when the mic gets passed to Darkness Dragon, he simply says, "My name is Darkness Dragon," and that is the last time that we would hear him speak until 2002.
Yeah, so obviously M2K didn't want to refer to Kobe, Japan, so they renamed him the Keiichi. I love the fact that Darkness Dragon, that becomes such a trope that when they would have an angle where they had like, oh, this is M2K's parents trying to get them to do a good thing, like they had a Darkness Dragon dad who only said, "I am Darkness Dragon's dad."
It's essentially the predecessor to "I am Don Fuji, goodbye."
Exactly, it was perfect.
It was. So that rounds us out in the year 2000. We go to the Korakuen Hall show on January 29th, 2001. This is one of the matches on the match guide. Again, by this point, Darkness Dragon has been around for 3 months. He's just wrestling Dragon Kid in some form of multi-man match on every show. It's Dragon Kid in the Sekigun against M2K. That is pretty much the constant unless they're beating up on Dayu Kawauchi. But on January 29th, 2001, there was an NWA World Welterweight Championship tournament to crown what was at that time a vacant championship because they forced Asuma Mochizuki to vacate the belt. And this is where Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid have their first ever singles match, Mike.
Yeah, and the big takeaway you have, so that, I mean, they've been in action, but you really would see over the 3 months up to it, like there'd be anticipation, they would get a little bit of contact, and that basically kind of would be it. Like Darkness would be the one that would go after Dragon Kid and the crowd brawls and the double ring out committee stuff, but it was something where it was just kind of happening. So we have this match January 29th, 2001. Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid, first time singles match. In case, would it surprise you that this match goes to a double count out in 14 minutes and 46 seconds? An incredibly violent match that you already see the tenor of this feud absolutely change on what happens when it is these two in the ring with each other. And that's was the big takeaway from this match was, God, these two guys, like Darkness Dragon is just going after Dragon Kid nonstop, going for mass grips, going everything. And also Dragon Kid has a pretty tight uniform at this point. His gear with it's almost Masquerade-esque that he was working with in this match.
The finish is representative of the double ring out committee gimmick. And, you know, it's something that I always feel when I go back and watch this stuff. I always feel it works great in trios matches, and it always leaves me a little disappointed in singles matches. You know, we won't spend a lot of time on the El Numero Unos that these guys competed in, but you got to remember, you know, part of the double ring out committee was that even the tournament matches would end in double countouts, and that was part of the gimmick. And so it's a little deflating when you have a singles match like this, a great singles match like this, and then it ends in a double countout, even if it's purposeful. Again, I'm always very forgiving of this concept. I think it's a really unique thing that they did. I always felt, however, that it really worked better in trios matches than singles matches. The violence is the interesting thing of this match, because if you're not familiar with these matches, and I say Dragon Kid and Darkness Dragon, you might think of the later Kness Yoshino matches, or you might think of Dragon Kid and Susumu and think of this sort of swanky, very pretty lucharesu grappling that, yes, the submissions are particularly brutal, but it's a very pretty form of wrestling. The Darkness Dragon Dragon Kid matches are not that at all. And repeatedly, especially in a year where everybody locked in is marveling at the youthfulness that Dragon Kid still demonstrates on a show in, show out basis, it's remarkable to think that 25 years ago, he was getting his ass kicked to the degree that he was by Darkness Dragon. This is a really stiff, really intense match. And while they do have, you know, classic Toryumon style sequences, it is far more violent than any of the other singles feuds that these guys would later be known for.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to, in a way, we have to quarantine Darkness Dragon to this time period when we talk about him, just because how much Kness kind of changes. Some of that is because we're getting to see actually in his prime Kness in this feud, but also the fact that just listeners, take your mind and put your mind in this. You're introduced to this guy basically in August. You still have no clue who he is whatsoever. That there's never really any like, oh, where's Makoto? That does not exist. Like, everyone's just going like, who is this Darkness Dragon guy? And Dragon Kid by 2001 is completely online. Any of the shakiness that you see in early 99 is completely out the door. He is the idol that he becomes, and you see for essentially 15 minutes a guy like take a ring mallet and basically use that as much as he can as possible, including you get to see, at least in this one a little bit, him doing like the classic Kness ring mallet in the boot comes out here. But I do think it's kind of important as we get into these matches, and I think you raised the valid point about like what sets M2K apart. With you have to go in with like the conceit of like the double ring out committee was the focus. You have to look at Darkness Dragon's career with the eyes of only like, this is where he was and the kind of wrestler that he was portrayed as, and not the hot fighting enthusiast Kness that we would see starting basically in 2004.
And I wonder if, and I mean, this is maybe a fruitless exercise, but I think a lot of people expressed disappointment in the Dragon Dia Inferno feud. But when you go back and you watch the beats of Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid, and then you think about the beats of that feud, because it was only a few years ago, they kind of line up. You know, it's not like Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid had a plethora of amazing matches that led up to this amazing mask match. It was a lot of heat. And that is one of the things, even within the confines of the mask match itself, which we'll get to, I'm just kind of blown away at just how much heat and how much hate M2K was providing, even at a time where Z-Brats is firing on all cylinders. It's a different sort of heel unit. It's a different sort of thing that was happening in Toryumon at the time.
Yeah, absolutely so. And you had this time that this was actually a topic that came up in the Discord. People bring up, has there been times you had multiple heel units at the same time? In 2001, Crazy Max, although incredibly popular and was already veering towards face status, you had, like, you're still dealing with the repercussions of you had those two heel units existing at the same time. So the brutality that you saw for M2K was entirely necessary, because you were seeing the change from Crazy Max, and you're seeing Crazy Max deal with M2K on their terms and how that feud goes in and out. And it's just such a important aspect to keep in mind, is that you have these kind of two, you have one true heel unit and you have one kind of tweeter heel unit that whenever it is like M2K versus Crazy Max, that's when things kind of change. And that was that kind of becomes the story of 2001.
That was January 29th, 2001, that singles match. We jump all the way to July 1st, 2001. This is Anniversario. Again, now what we recognize as Kobe World 2001. This match, I would say, is not necessarily consequential in the grand scheme of Dragon Kid versus Darkness Dragon. I do think it's worth mentioning, though. This show had Dragon Kid, Ricky Marvin, and Ryo Saito versus Darkness Dragon, Susumu Mochizuki, and Yasushi Kanda. And I do think this match is worth noting, because on this show, you had this match, and then your two main events were Fujishima and SUWA versus Grand Hamada, Great Sasuke, and Tiger Mask 4. And then your main event was Magnum Tokyo versus Masaki Mochizuki for the British Commonwealth Junior title. This, by all accounts of people that were covering this show in the moment, is the turning point of when the English-speaking fan base had gone from hyper-fixating on Crazy Max and buying tapes for Crazy Max and focusing on them as the primary draw of this promotion, again, for that English-speaking fan base, to Dragon Kid, Ricky Marvin, and Ryo Saito and M2K blow everybody out of the water on this show. And it's kind of a turning point where people realized, oh, these guys are what's up. Like, there's already a new generation of great wrestler in Toryumon, and it's largely spearheaded by Dragon Kid and Darkness Dragon.
Yeah, I love this match.
I do too.
It is, there's so many like different facets of this. You're starting to see the Nesca chemistry really play off and really form. Like that's one of the kind of like the interesting things about Darkness Dragon is that he comes in at a time where he has the back burner Dragon Kid stuff, but it also happens at a time where by the end of this timeline, essentially, Yasushi Kanda is no longer an active wrestler. So the tag team of M2K goes from Susumu Mochizuki and Yasushi Kanda, which is the original Dragon Gate tag team. I mean, winning everything, like being like that decorated team, to then kind of becoming Kness and Susumu. And you get to kind of see like the three guys in this match on an M2K kind of find that chemistry throughout it. But my real takeaway from this match that I loved, Ryo Saito at this point, this was his real coming out party, this match.
I don't think a lot of new fans realize that when Saito was good, he was as good as he was. And that includes 2001 and 2002 Saito and 2005 Saito and, you know, last era of greatness, 2012 and 2013 Ryo Saito. He was just when he was good, he was unbelievably good. And this was definitely a sweet spot in his career.
Yeah. As like a side thing on this watch list, there's going to be a lot of Ryo on it. Mm-hmm. And if you're someone who always is like, why, this guy, why is he such a big figure? This is like a great opportunity because at least throughout this feud, he is the constant tag team partner and second gun for Dragon Kid.
This is unrelated to anything Darkness Dragon Kid related. I have to go find the full version of this show and rewatch the opening match, Grand Apache and Arakin versus Horiguchi and all caps Saito.
Yeah.
That, oh my God, do I know what I'm doing when I'm done here? That is, I'm sure I've watched it. I've obviously watched the show. It doesn't stick out in my mind, but with my current taste, that sounds so appealing right now. So that is getting watched, but
especially Apache in 2001 with the do-rag and all of that.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, is that he's like doing Too Cold Scorpio cosplay. It's very, very odd.
It rules. Like you call it odd, I think it's awesome.
I have no argument there. So we hit the stretch right after Anniversario 2001, where on July 8th, 2001, Darkness Dragon, Susumu Mochizuki, and Yasushi Kanda, they win the UWA Trios belts from Big Fuji, Shima, and SUWA. After that match, and again, this is July 8th, 2001, in Differ Ariake. So after that match, they agreed to set up at the August Corkin Hall show that there would be the first ever televised, more on that in a second, first ever televised three-way trios match for the UWA belts, but that would take place in August. On July 19th, before we got there, Fuji, Shima, and SUWA won the belts back from M2K, Dragon, Susumu, and Kanda, and that paved the way for one of the most influential matches in Toryumon and Dragon Gate and Dragon System history. Dragon Kid, Magnum TOKYO, and Ryo Saito versus Big Fuji, Shima, and SUWA versus Darkness Dragon, Masaki Mochizuki, and Yasushi Kanda in the first ever televised three-way trios match for the UWA Trios belts.
And we say televised for one big reason, because this match happened before the three-way match happened in March. It was not televised. In case, who is the infamous person who was subbed in that match to kind of try things out there?
So I'm sure we've talked about this on the show before, and I definitely knew this at one point, but I completely forgot. And when you talk about Holy Grail, I mean, this is a holy shit level of match. The match, and this was in Iwate on March 13th, 2001 during the El Numero Uno tournament. The full card, 4 matches, Taru versus Ryo Saito, Dragon Kid versus Stalker Ichikawa, Arakin and Kanda, which of course went to a double count out because of Kanda. And then your main event, 3-way, 9-way elimination, 9-man elimination tag match, Big Fuji, Shima, and SUWA versus Darkness Dragon, Masaki Mochizuki, and Susumu Mochizuki versus Genki Horiguchi, Magnum TOKYO, and Tomohiro Ishii.
And it's worth noting at this time that Ishii kind of inhabited the Dayu Kauchi kind of role as a freelancer at that time. Again, he had the war connections. He had this and like 12 matches against Stalker Ichikawa that never made tape.
I don't know anybody that's seen this. I don't know if it's
maybe
filmed
Yamato in the crowd that night.
Maybe Yamato was in the crowd. It's got to be near the top of the most desirable non-televised Toryumon and Dragon Gate matches in history. And it would have been that way without Ishii in the match. Given what we saw in August, I would have loved to have seen the prototype, but to think that this match exists with Ishii in it is absolutely incredible to think about.
Yeah, so this match, I know we've talked about and probably have covered this match before several times. It is magic. It is when Dragon Gate became this like mystical property.
It can't be overstated how special this match is.
Yeah, no, it is just phenomenal. It is at least to me, like you see a match work here that essentially gets stolen throughout the rest of the wrestling world. And really, I would say the idea of the junior heavyweight sprint as an all-out thing starts on this match. And you can do your direct through line to March 31st, 2006 does not happen because this match would not happen if this match never happened.
Yeah, because obviously more people have seen 8:30:03 and more people have seen 3:31:06. And I think probably even more people have seen Kobe World 2005 with Blood Generation and Do Fixer there. But this is as important of a match as there is in the history of Toryumon and Dragon Gate. This is it. And it's such an incredible match. I always think of the spot. SUWA and Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid are in the ring, and Darkness Dragon has a waist lock on Dragon Kid, and SUWA's standing in the corner, and it's kind of one of those like, oh, is Dragon Kid gonna duck? Is SUWA gonna help Darkness Dragon? Is SUWA gonna help Dragon Kid? Like, we don't know what's gonna happen, and instead SUWA just hits a John Woo on both of them at the same time, and that to me is always the demarcation point of like, oh, this match was cool, and then it became, oh, this match is unbelievably great. It flips a switch in that moment, and it holds up remarkably well 23 years later.
So the two falls, Kness gets the Logmar draw on Shima. We'll talk about what Shima does after that in a second. And then Seki Gun becomes the 19th, the UWA Trios champions, when Magnum Tokyo hits the AV star press on Yasushi Kanda. Everyone starts celebrating, but then we have a brawl that kind of happens right as the belts are being awarded, as someone in a Darkness Dragon mask hits the ring, and then Darkness Dragon hops up in the ring and rips it off, and it's Shima there, and this absolute just pandemonium breaks up, and that leads us to Ultimo Dragon coming out as he always kind of did. Like, do you think Ultimo would be really happy to go back to the fact that he could go be like the last minute matchmaker? Like, I feel like that would be his one desire in the promotion, because in 2001 especially, he came out and he set up Darkness Dragon versus Dragon Kid versus Shima versus Masaki Mochizuki versus Magnum at Absolutemente 2001 and Oda Ward Semi Gymnasium. It's a cage match, and it's the first 5-way hair versus match cage match happening. What an angle.
What an angle. If what Mike said about Shima coming out in the Darkness Dragon match didn't make sense, don't worry. It's not going to make any more sense when you watch it.
It's Shima being Shima.
It's such pure bedlam, and it really, I mean, I obviously loved all of this stuff prior to doing the monthly rewinds and rewatches that we've done this year, but really coming away from the M2K stuff we watched at the start of the year, I just have an entirely new appreciation for this promotion, and part of that is just the unadulterated chaos that consumed Toryumon from opening match to main event, and
until
this is
Ultimo
no different.
Comes out.
And then you're right, exactly. And Ultimo sets the record straight. And this cage match is not a great cage match. It's one that, you know, Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid are in it. So I'll mention it here briefly. The importance of this match, however, it expands far beyond just Darkness Dragon, Dragon Kid. It sets the template for the chemistry that we still recognize in these Dragon Gate cage matches, because the way it was set up was that, okay, Dragon Kid and Magnum Tokyo, those guys are allies, and Darkness Dragon and Masaki Mochizuki are allies, and they position it during this angle as like, good, we have partners. Shima, you're going to be all alone. You are going to be bald. You're going to lose your hair because you don't have an ally in this cage match. And in the post-match promo, Shima spins it, and it's like, Yeah, but I also don't have somebody that's going to turn on me. It might be better to be in there alone than to be with your friends, or at least the people that you thought were your friends. And we are still living through that psychology 23 years later.
Oh, I mean, Case, I think it's the exact same cage. Like that was
that would not surprise me.
That was my big takeaway. Like I watched this cage match a long time ago. Rewatching it here, I was like, well, when I was young in my Dragon Gate fandom, I wouldn't have been like, what? Ooh, this cage? Okay, that makes sense. This is the first one. Now I'm like, oh no, those panels look the exact same. Like it looks like the exact same cage. But you get to see, like, as I kind of said in my thesis, this is a framework that the company kind of just now. It's almost like the master text. You get a lot of the proto tropes in the cage match happening here. No, there's not insane like weapon attacks, but you get that you get what happens when you're able to go free, when everyone leaves Masaki Mochizuki to the middle of the ring, because the other four immediately, when they're allowed to get up in the cage, they go do that. You get the turn moments. You get, okay, Shima hurts his knee, so how is he getting out of the cage? Oh, he decides to treat it like monkey bars. And these are the things that, like, to this day are like intrinsic parts of the steel cage warfare match. And it happens in 2001.
It happens in 2001. Magnum Tokyo goes bald. Shima's hurt. Mochi leaves M2K extremely shortly after that. So that cage match, again, it's not a great match, but you have the long-term effects with the psychology there. And in the short term, it paved the way for the rest of the year. So you end 2001 in this timeline. October 28th, 2001, there's a great UWA Trios match where M2K win the belts from Saito, Dragon Kid, and Magnum Tokyo. And then a week later, Kobe Chicken George, you get your second Dragon Kid Darkness Dragon match. This time, instead of a double count out, they wrestle to a 15-minute time limit draw.
Yeah, and this is in Kobe Chicken George, which is my personal favorite Dragon Gate venue that they had. Mm-hmm. There was an aborted piece I had this year working on this before 2024 became the year of chaos for both of us.
I live with immense regret in a very genuine way over the things that I tried to do for Dragon Gate 25 that fell through, and the things that I tried to do for Dragon Gate 25 that I simply do not have time for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story of both our 2024s. But Kobe Chicken George, I'm glad we have this one here, because you get to see how vastly different the venues that Dragon Gate would run, because we have matches here from Odyssey Gymnasium. We have matches here from Kobe World Cannon Hall. We have a match here from Kobe Chicken George, one of the more important venues that they don't run anymore. This was their hometown shows, would be in here. You would not have any sort of barricade. People would be standing up to a rope, and you got to see kind of all of that play out across 15 minutes in this match. And I feel like that in of itself, in a series that they do not touch very much in singles matches, the fact that they had one of their few ones in this feud at Kobe Chicken George is one of those like big moments to me. Like, as we were going through this, I was like, hell yeah, we're getting some Chicken George here.
It goes to show just how long this feud was they could run this match in Cork and in Kobe, and then, you know, there's big stuff in Differ Ariake, and then they obviously closed out at Ariake Coliseum. It spanned basically the entire Toryumon market at this time. And this match, much like the match in January, incredibly violent. Really, again, not a pretty match.
Yeah, that ringside rope gets used a lot across the throat of Dragon Kid.
Yeah. So that is the end of 2001. Again, most of 2001, these guys wrestle a ton of matches, some of which are noteworthy, some of which are merely good. And then we take ourselves to March 21st, 2002. This is the start of the El Numero Uno tournament that year. And this is, I would say, one of the most pivotal nights in this feud. I actually didn't check. I don't know if this show made tape, but I know from the news updates at the time, this is the show where Darkness Dragon teamed up with Genki Horiguchi, who by this point is a heel in an M2K, against Dragon Kid and Ricky Marvin. And Mike, this is the night that Darkness Dragon finally found a counter to the Cristo. He unveiled his submission, the Judah, one of the most devastating submissions in the history of the Dragon system.
Yeah, and this is the turning point in the feud. This is from here on, I would say the feud is now fully on, because the Judah, so the Cristo, of course, is his version of the Totoworo octopus stretch. The Judah, basically partway through, he grabs the arm that Kid is going to go for and sits he grabs the leg, and before he goes for the arm, he sits down like a stretch muffler, and it's an immediate tap out from Dragon Kid throughout the rest of the feud. Throughout like the rest of Kness's time in wrestling, this was the counter, and this led to Kness then developing counters for other wrestlers. Most famously, the Sol Naciente becomes the Sol Nochesel when Kness faces off against Yoshino.
And I fear perhaps I'm editorializing too much here, but it makes sense in a way that it took Darkness Dragon nearly 2 full years to come up with an effective counter to the heir of the Dragon family, because it kind of goes back to what we talked about when we began this timeline. He was Makoto. He was a Wrestle Yume factory guy. He was a scrub indie wrestler who decided to target, outside of CIMA, the most visible, the most protected, the most talented star in Toryumon at the time. It would make sense from a logical level that this guy wasn't on his level at the start, but he hated him. And over time, this hatred developed into talent and into chemistry. And then he had the Judah. And from here, like you said, we are off to the races, Mike.
Yeah, and it is something that we immediately start seeing in the summer series of three-way six-man.
So June 7th, 2002, this is the fan event that took place after the Cork and Hall show. June 6th, they had a T2P show because T2P is fully integrated, at least wrestling their own shows in Japan at this point. And June 7th, there was a Dragon Gate Cork and Hall show. After the show, there was a fan event in which Toryumon announced that they would be running Ariake Coliseum on September 8th of that year, the biggest Toryumon venue to date. They announced that it would be full-on Toryumon versus T2P. And also, and I'll mention this here because I don't know if there's a better time to mention it, it was the biggest Toryumon show in history up to date, and it was rumored heavily leading up to the show that Bill Goldberg might make an appearance and might wrestle Stalker Ichikawa.
Yeah, Ariake Coliseum, it got redeveloped out of it, but for up until they started running Sumo Hall, this was the biggest venue they ran ever. And then they ran Sumo Hall as that, and they knew that they were going to fill up this building and that they were going to try to do their best to do so, because you had Ultimo call up those WCW names, because at this point you also have, you mentioned that you had the T2P shows, but you already had Crazy Max starting to feud with Italian Connection at this point.
Exactly, yeah.
So I wanted to, I knew there was a moment in the timeline to get into this, but at this point you're seeing the Dragon system essentially have two brands running, not full time, but essentially if you would combine the two, you get about 75% of the modern, I would say 75% of the modern schedule would be about as amount of shows they were running between the two brands at that point.
That seems fair.
But as you're doing this, this was the time that I think it is worth noting that they decided now it's time for us to turn this on, make this into this kind of feud, and make this into this kind of center post feud, because you already had what was going to be your big T2P feud with Crazy Max versus Italian Connection. You needed something to hold up the TJ side, and this was the obvious answer.
We go to Anniversario 2002, a really legendary stretch for the company here, where the main event of this show is another three-way trios match. CIMA, Don Fuji, and Taru versus Dragon Kid, Babyface Masaki Mochizuki, and Ryo Saito. They are the second gun at this point. And then M2K, Darkness Dragon, Genki Horiguchi, and Magnum TOKYO. And then a week later, or 2 weeks later, I apologize, 2 weeks later, on July 14th in Differ Ariake, they run the same match back. And after, at Anniversario, Crazy Max getting the win in the final fall with CIMA pinning Genki Horiguchi, Darkness Dragon takes matters into his own hands. He pins Taru and he submits Dragon Kid. And all of a sudden, once again, M2K are standing on top in this battle for unit supremacy.
Yeah, so the real big switch is, of course, Mochizuki, after the hair match, leaves M2K, tries to pull them into clean fighting. That does not happen. Magnum TOKYO turns and becomes the new leader of M2K, and you kind of, you're in this awkward period that goes with M2K through the end of this feud, basically until the announcement of Real Do Fixer, that it's this heel unit that is figuring itself out what it is to kind of be the lead heel unit in Toryumon Japan at this time, which I feel like you had to do this kind of shakeup because on the other side, and as a big part of the match in Ariake, you had Italian Connection sitting in chairs in the front up on the entrance area.
Yep.
And Shima loses it partway through and ends up turning into a Crazy Max versus Italian Connection brawl.
It's a lot like Shima putting on the Darkness Dragon match in the August 2001 match, where it's all confusing and it shouldn't make sense, but it's kind of the magic of Shima. And I think this is probably worth noting in Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame season that, hey, for 25 years, this guy was fucking brilliant. It's just one of those things where this all blends together. And I can't believe the guts they showed of putting the Anniversario main event in Differ Ariake 2 weeks after it happened. It is something that I desperately wish they would do now. And obviously, there's never going to be another Kobe World that's headlined by like a Triangle Gate match. But could you imagine doing Kobe World and then putting that same match in Korakuen during the August Korakuen show?
Oh my God, like that is a level of putting your check where you can't do that today because of streaming.
Yeah, you're right.
Because it would have been a pay-per-view to see Kobe World Live or Anniversario Live at that time. But if you're someone who is only watching the TV, I mean, Vamos Amigos wouldn't air stuff from Kobe World until later that fall.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I think it would be ballsy, and I think it would be like showing a certain level of confidence that I would love. I feel like in some ways Dragon Gate's getting its groove back in certain kinds of confidence. I just don't know if that's possible to do that now because of just the Dragon Gate network and streaming and how I mean, sadly weak the wrestling industry is versus 22 years ago.
They could, however, book a bunch of three-way trios matches and even four-way trios matches, and that is in their power, and they can do that, and they should do that. So after the July 14th match, and again, this is where Darkness Dragon, he pins Taru, and then he submits Dragon Kid, and for the first time in 2 years, he gets on the microphone and he cuts a promo. And this is worth noting, again, at the time, M2K is Magnum-led, Genki Horiguchi, Susumu Mochizuki, Darkness Dragon. And Magnum...
Konda was still around.
Konda's hurt.
Yeah, he's done for this point, but he's still an active presence.
Yes, you're right. That's good clarification. So Magnum is the leader, and this makes me think of Kaito Ishida in Gold Class. Magnum, for whatever reason at this time, would cut these promos where he would really go after fans, and he would use a ton of profanity, both of which are extremely uncommon in the history of Toryumon and Dragon Gate, but he would cut these really, really aggressive promos. In Darkness Dragon after the match made 2 points. He said, one, there's only one need for one dragon in Toryumon. Dragon Kid, we're going to put an end to this sooner rather than later. We're going to do it at the September 8th show. And also, Magnum TOKYO, knock it off. This is a step too far. I do not like what you are doing. And then on the July 20th house show, this time Darkness Dragon once again cut a promo, and he chastised Genki Horiguchi for intruding in the Susumu and Ricky Marvin match, and noted that M2K intrusion should only be for double ringouts, not for aiding victories, which there's
Perfect.
a great level.
Yeah.
There's a great level of irony there that we certainly don't need to get into. It seemed like a harsh character adjustment given the 2.5 years of M2K constantly aiding in victory, but it got us to the point that we needed to get to, which was that Dragon Kid and Darkness Dragon made it official. They would be wrestling a mask versus mask match at that Ariake Coliseum show. Before we got there, and I'll throw it back to you momentarily, in Kumamoto on July 24th, Genki Horiguchi won the NWA welterweight belt from Ricky Marvin with a beach break. He would be forced to defend that title against Darkness Dragon on the 28th with Yasushi Kanda as the referee in an all M2K affair. Darkness Dragon would win that match, and then he would wrestle Dragon Kid on August 11th in a title match, and he would retain the belt there. He wrestled Dragon Kid on August 11th, and then August 25th. The 25th match is for the title, and he was victorious in both of those matches.
So let's take a moment for Magnum. One would say that this is Magnum at the height of being Magnum. Like, he was never, like, after this angle, like, things kind of, like, do fixer happens, and Magnum is not necessarily the presence, but I think that there's a through line to Darkness Dragon saying stop cussing.
Mhm.
I really do, because I went into my private archive so I could watch entrances and stuff, because that's part of the fun in doing this. You have like the M2K dance happen beforehand, and it's just the most indulgent Magnum thing possible, because he's Mr. Egotist at this point. He's already done the full character turn, and it's all about him all the time.
It is interesting to think about the circumstances that led to that, where the end of 2001, and I would really say the entirety of 2002, is a year that I associate with Shima being injured. I think he's great, obviously. I think he's great. And on the Absolutemente show, we won't talk about his match, but, Crazy Max versus Italian Connection is an all-timer. But it's a year where he's not as healthy, and it's a year where he very clearly cements himself as a 1B to Magnum's 1A. And then in 2003, at this point, Milano is full-time, and Milano and Magnum, much like Magnum and SUWA, did not get along. And, Milano's career, you could argue, was effectively shot dead when Magnum beats him at the end of 2003 in a match that Milano really should have won and won the title in. But it kind of becomes a thing where, by default, you're right, 2002 is Magnum's year. Because think about 2003 Toryumon. It's not a perfect promotion by any means, but you have Shima and El Numero Uno, and that means you have Genki and El Numero Uno. And that also, like I said, now you've got Milano full-time, and you've got SUWA coming back into the fold. You see the competition from a talent and projection standpoint. It becomes overwhelming for Magnum. I don't think about Magnum Tokyo in 2003, but 2002 is kind of the sweet spot for him. That's a really good observation.
Yeah, and with the way that when M2K becomes like Do Fixer, and it's like in of his image, like you already have the point that the M2K parts of Do Fixer kind of are pulling apart at that point.
Yeah, very much so. So that takes us to September 8th, 2002, where again, at this point, you have 4 career singles matches between these guys, a double ring out, a time limit draw, and then from July 14th onwards, Darkness Dragon is essentially a man possessed, and a dominant man at that. He beats Dragon Kid twice over the course of 2 weeks in the lead up to this match. Neither one of those matches is televised. The 11th match is televised. Unfortunately, the welterweight title match I have never seen footage of, and that is the kind of thing that I would certainly like to see. But all of this 2-year build takes us to September 8th, 2002, the biggest show in Toryumon history, in the main event, Mask versus Mask, Dragon Kid versus Darkness Dragon. Mike, I give the floor to you to wax poetically about this match.
So we've got to talk about how this match is different from how things are now.
Mm-hmm.
First off, it's a traditional 2 out of 3 falls lucha match. In doing so, and one of the facets about this, the network feed doesn't really have this part of it. If you have the complete show, then they do have this. There's 3 referees during this match, and that is a very key point of it, because this was a T2P versus Toryumon Japan show. You had a T2P referee, you had a Toryumon Japan referee, and you had Izushi Kanda. They randomly drew, and Kanda got listed as third. So the idea was that not that every fall they would change referees, but essentially like you would have these, because this was M2K involvement, and there was going to be a final conclusion here. So there was 3 referees, and throughout the match they would all be involved in some certain facets. So important to get that out first for people who've not watched the match, because there's really not another match that has referee stakes to that point, really. Like this does kind of lead to Kanda. After this match, he's no longer affiliated with M2K, really. But
his retirement match is October 2002. He really goes away after this.
Yeah, he comes back a bit later as the GM and does referee a little bit, but then we were really talking about the Dragon Gate era. So those are things to talk about this match. But the thing about this match, to me, this is the most traditional lucha apuesta that the Dragon system ever has, guys. There's never.
In The Observer, Dave describes the match as being very Antonio Pena, obviously the founder of AAA. I mean, it feels like it should be taking place in Tijuana and not Tokyo.
Right. So you have that. Obviously, like I'll run down the falls here because this is kind of one of those things there's a double count out as the first fall. And at that point, you have everyone kind of confer, and they say, like, all right, since it's one fall, you both lost that fall. That means the next fall, the winner of the fall wins the match. So they go to double count out. There's a whole bunch of referee shenanigans ending up with Zushi Kanda being the referee for the last fall. By the time of the double count out, Dragon Kid's mask is already completely shredded. And in one of the things that I think if you watch this on the network, you get a special appreciation of because they remaster it, Dragon Kid's mask is the all-white mask that he always would wear for like the big match things. By the time that the double countout happens, the front half of his mask is completely blood red because he's bleeding that poorly. And then you have this 12-minute second fall that ends up going through all the tropes. You get the Judah tease, he fights out of that. And then you get M2K involvement with Kanda. Kanda at the end just has enough of it, and that allows Dragon Kid. He basically takes out all of M2K with the box and then calls the match, the final fall, completely clean. Dragon Kid wins. Kness starts the storm out. He wins with the Dragon Rana, but he decides to get back into the ring. He doesn't allow Dragon Kid to take off his mask. He instead rips it off and hands it to him. And you get the nice moment that this is a question for a future J show. The commentators were completely stunned that it was Makoto. I'm wondering at what point did the fandom pick up on this being Makoto Sato being Darkness Dragon.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we'll have Jay on. I was thinking about this today. We've got to have him on to talk Ichikawa retirement.
Oh, absolutely.
And from the Toryumon X episode, I have a bunch of Toryumon X questions for him. So that's good. Write that down because I'm curious now too. It's really like when, again, I'll keep on relating it back to the other M2K episode we did. The Shima Mochi hair match is a match that I had seen a few times, but only in my most recent viewing was I able to appreciate the chaos of it all. And this is a match that I knew was chaotic, but watching everything through in this real chronological way, because I rewatched a lot of the highlighted matches for this feud in the lead up to this, because I again, it's not my go-to Toryumon thing. I always need a refresher on this feud. The chaos in this match and the guts, by the way, the guts it takes in a 2 out of 3 falls match to begin with a double count out and then decide that the next fall is going to be the final fall is an insane piece of Galaxy Brain booking. And then you factor in all of the run-ins, the idea of the 3 referees, Kanda being so involved as the referee. All of this, if you explained it to me, if I didn't know what was going on, if I didn't know the wrestlers, if I hadn't seen the match, I would think this would suck so much. And that is really, as I have come on my most recent rewatch of a lot of this Toryumon stuff to fully appreciate and feel about this promotion, is Toryumon on paper should have sucked. And the magic is simply that it didn't. Forget the fact that at times it was very good. A lot of the time it was objectively great. It all should have sucked. And the fact that it didn't is an utter miracle. And this is a match that could have fallen apart. It could have been a disaster. It could have been too much and killed the crowd on this long, weird show. It's such a weird show historically. And yet they're there every step of the way. And it is a testament to Dragon Kid, who I think you and I both feel very comfortable, whereas maybe 3 years ago we did not, but we feel very comfortable now saying he's one of the 100 greatest wrestlers ever. Darkness Dragon, Kness, Jimmy Kness, JKS, Makoto, whatever name he goes by, is a special kind of big match wrestler who was able to deliver in the biggest moments when they needed them to. It's a beautiful disaster, but it is an incredible watch, whether you've never seen it before or it's been years since you've seen it. You owe it to yourself to sit down and watch this match.
Yeah, each time that we talk about this feud, I end up watching this match. I feel like I've seen it probably outside of maybe Gate of Destiny 2015. Mm-hmm. This is probably the Dragon System match I've probably gone back and rewatched the most. And a lot of that is the trappings of this show. It's such a unique thing. I mean, you had you had the Dancing Fools reunite against Berletta boxer Shuichi Kondo and Takayuki Yagi, and that was just 3 matches from the top, and right after Ultimo Dragon's return to wrestling.
Which was a weird match where people still to this day don't know what happened there.
Yeah, on a show where they kept on giving Ultimo gear throughout the show.
Yeah.
It's a weird show, but you have at least, and I know we've talked about the UWA match before, these 2 matches that in a lot of ways are perfect encapsulations of what the Dragon system was and what makes it special. The fact that you have this weird show with 2 rings, and you have a match between Italian model heels and crazy match who are just profane assholes, and then you follow that up with the most like the trappings that are incredible. Like it's one of the biggest shames about the network is that not a lot of people get to have the touch of what happens when Dragon Kid comes out, because it comes out to Bonnie Tyler holding out for a hero at this time, and it's at these moments and at these matches that they're the times that I look at Dragon Kid and I go, man, we don't give Dragon Kid the credit he deserves.
We don't, and I don't.
He deserves an
know
up
how
and
to
down
do it.
vote. He deserves an up and down vote. Like just at this, because like imagine 2002. Consider like what would happen over the next 22 years how many wrestlers in Japan, because of seeing Dragon Kid in this feud, ended up becoming a professional wrestler. I would argue that outside of maybe some of like the peak Showa stuff and then the magnetism of Tanahashi Okada, I would say that this match maybe launched as many careers as anything else in Japan for the last 20 years.
It's another thing to ask Jay about. The thing that I guess I struggle with, right, is I frame a lot of things, I think, just because of when I came into this level of intelligentsia around Greatest Wrestler Ever, because the 2016 one happened just at a very formative time where I was already watching a lot of, for me, new footage, and so I think about a lot of things through, is this one of the 100 greatest wrestlers of all time? It's a very fun ongoing game for me, and it feels inherently wrong to have a list, at least in 2021, where it's Shingo and Mochi and Yoshino and Susumu and Shima, and it's a list that I think had 11 Dragon Gate Toryumon guys on it. 11 out of 100 is a lot of wrestlers, and that is without a Dragon Kid and with Naruki Doi barely being in the mix. It's just a very strange thing. But as time goes on, and this is the argument that I have repeatedly said over the 25th anniversary of Dragon Gate, is for somebody like Dragon Kid, or for somebody like Susumu, or for somebody like Shima, who at least had 20 prime years, but for these day one guys that are still going, they have been great for 25 years. And that is incredibly abnormal. And I understand in the digital age that time means something different and that our perception of time has drastically changed. But think about somebody being great from 1974 to 1999. Think about it from that, and then realize that we have lived through that with Dragon Kid. And maybe he wasn't great in 99, but he was very, very exciting. By 2001, 2002, you're talking about a capital G great pro wrestler. And that didn't change at any point between then and now. And you're right, there is just a weird thing, and I think it actually comes from like the hardcore Dragon Gate fan, not the casual I've seen Blood Generation Do Fixer fan, where we are the ones that underrate Dragon Kid. And I don't know how to rectify that. I don't know what level of credit to give him, but he is a truly profound and special pro wrestler.
Yeah, and you have this really kind of special feud that puts him at the pinnacle. You there's never going to be a Dragon Kid Dreamgate run. He was never UDG champion. I don't think he ever won the British Commonwealth either. But at the time where the company thought that they needed him the most, they decide, who's the guy that we're really putting this on? Who's the one that we give the ball to, and he's going to be the one that we could put headlining the biggest show of our of our entire existence at this point, it's Dragon Kid. And I think that especially now in 2024, that is a certain path that I don't know can happen again in the Dragon system. I don't think that I would love there to be a scenario where Dragon Gate is probably putting 7,000 people into Sumo Hall, because that's basically equivalent of what they did for this show. But I don't know what that path is to get there. But what I do know is that at a time where, still 5 years for Dragon Kid, Darkness Dragon as a full-time wrestler really starts like in 96. So you're talking about 6 years. So two guys have combined less than a dozen years of pro wrestling. You've put them in, you've let them do this kind of long feud that was never necessarily the hottest thing until it needed to be the hottest thing, and you trusted these two guys. And I feel like that's remarkable. And I know that's the end of your timeline, but there's like one more thing that I think we need to talk about before we close the doors on the Darkness Dragon and Dragon Kid feud case, and that is what happens in the immediate aftermath.
Yeah,
and
please. I don't have this in there, but go ahead.
So what you have, so this show happened on the 8th of September. From there, you had Darkness Dragon wrestle unmasked for the next month or so, and starting to team with Dragon Kid. He debuts at Kobe Sambo, not Kobe Sambo, Kobe Chicken George. The fact that he will be going as Kness as his next name, and he sticks with that basically throughout the remainder of his time in Dragon Gate. There's a whole Do Fixer fallout and all of that, but that is a different story for another day. But coming straight out of Absolutemente, at least for the short time period before Do Fixer, you had suddenly both dragons teaming with each other, Dragon Kid and Kness.
Good stuff there. Very, very good stuff.
So that was my my pick for the series. I don't think you did you ever have this as a highly rated match?
In what way?
I've always had this as a 5-star match. And
I'd probably go 4.25.
That's fair. That's fair. You've always kind of been, this has been a feud that I talk about with like vaunted praise, and you're like, I like it. Did anything going back through this kind of change through this rewatch for you?
Well, it makes me really think that the two July 2002 matches, the two three-way trios there, there's a larger part. I was, as I often do, thinking about the legacy of Shun Skywalker and thinking about how I think at Kobe World 2021, when Shun wrestled KZ and Yamato, both of those matches are so good that they cannibalized each other and neither became his signature match. And I think it's a similar case in the July matches in 2002, where you have the Anniversario one and the Differ Ariake one that are both so good that it splits the favoritism, and so they cannibalize each other. I think we should probably have a greater fondness for those matches than we do. But I came away this time, knowing that the mask match was as heated as it was, but seeing all the way through just how stiff and how intense all of their matches were was the big takeaway for me. And I'm somebody who, quite honestly, like, I prefer Kness and Yoshino. I think they had better matches together. But as a 2-year feud from start to finish, this is really an incredible piece of booking.
Yeah, it's a different tenor, and I wonder if you reverse the order of the feuds in a way, do you get the chemistry that he has with Yoshino? Because I think like him becoming the whole Judah thing kind of enables the hot fighting in that kind of way. Like that's been a takeaway I've been thinking about is like the order of things. I think that Kness inhabits the special kind of place that I mean, he never, like, during, like, peak Western interest, ever was kind of that guy that was ever the international fans kind of guy, other than the people like Jay Church.
Yeah.
But it is the getting to go back through this, and especially, like, the rewind rewatches we've done this year really have given me, like, a deeper appreciation for what they pulled off of M2K. Like, that's been the thing. It's like, this is something that should, like, be, like, the most Russo booking possible. But you had this heel unit that worked in it within it, and you were able to define a logic that a fan base was able to go along with that logic. And I think like these two Rewind and Rewatches kind of complement each other in the way that like my takeaway of M2K, if we did different rankings of Dragon Gate units, I think M2K would have always been a top 10 unit for me, but coming out of these two episodes might be a top 4. Like, I have a new appreciation for them coming out of this.
I think that's I'm in the same boat. That's a very good point. It's always something I knew that I liked, but really, Toryumon in general, like it had been a long time since I had seen some of this stuff, and then even along the way, I discovered some matches that I had skipped over or had missed and just hadn't seen, and there's nothing in wrestling that is close to this, and that includes Dragon Gate, and I don't want Dragon Gate to become this. I desperately do wish, though, that there was some promotion out there, whether it was Prestige or AEW or something in the UK, where there was a clear Toryumon influence there. Because I think that influence in particular has completely vanished.
No, I think that's a really good point to make here. Do you have any other big takeaways before we get out of here?
Let me end with this. I got to go in 1 second, but tweet from Ryo Saito about 20 minutes ago. The Google translation reads, "A large screen will be set up at the Korakuen Hall event on October 4th. I have some announcements for you all. What on earth is that? See it for yourself. We look forward to your visit."
Oh boy, the fact that there's a screen at Korakuen Hall gets me nervous.
A very daunting proposition.
But we will be back next week to talk all about that and then the other side of the Dragon system. Great version Mega from Osaka Edion Arena Case. I've been dreading this show for a long time, and it's upon us finally.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
But you can follow us on Twitter at OpenVoiceGate. If you like the show and you want to find the match listing, we'll have that for you both in the show description, the post on voicesofwrestling.com, as well as the Voices of Wrestling Discord. It's the best place in the internet to talk Dragon Gate, and we'll have all this the links and everything for this Rewind and Rewatch there. You can follow us on Twitter at Open Voice Gate. I'm at Fujiheya. Case is at _ in your case. Thanks for listening to Open Voice Gate. We'll be back with you next week. Take care, everyone.
Hello there, everybody. It's me, Garrett Kidney, the co-host of You've Got to Be Kidding Me on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
And I am Liam Jones, my full name, and I'm also a part of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network as a co-host for You've Got to Be Kidding Me.
We are a TNA history podcast that covers TNA 1 month at a time. We cover all the drama, all the matches, all the Vince Russo nonsense you could ever want in your life.
Have you heard of TNA? I bet you have, but would it be funnier if two people made jokes over it the whole time? Probably.
So if that sounds like fun to you, check it out on this very Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network, and Liam will do bits and whatnot.